Kate worked as a kindergarten teacher. She had been working there for 3 years now, and it was her favorite thing to do, because at least in kindergarten she felt less pain. Talking to children distracted her from her sad thoughts. "What do you want, girl?" The young doctor told her with a look of mock concern. "The first abortion at 17. It's the consequences." But then everything went without complications. Kate could barely hold back her tears. Especially now, medicine has come a long way. Can't anything be done? You can try IVF, but you shouldn't get your hopes up. In your case, there is little chance, the gynecologist answered with an indifferent shrug. Kate left the doctor's office humiliated. Her friend Amber met her outside the hospital, and after listening to Kate, she was outraged. "What kind of doctor is that?" "Kate, I have a good doctor I know. He works in a private clinic. You should go to him." Her friend sincerely wanted to help. "Tomorrow we'll go together. I'll call and make an appointment with him." "Amber, I'm already so tired." Kate sobbed, and wiping away her tears, she added, "Besides, Joseph doesn't seem to care about any of this. He doesn't seem to care." "God, men are all like that. You should be more persistent," Amber replied confidently. Amber seemed to have convinced her friend. The doctor at the private clinic turned out to be attentive, and the specialist was obviously a good one. "Well, Kate, your case is complicated, but not hopeless," he said after the examination. "You will take the tests, and then everything will be clear. But I can already tell you that you have a chance to give birth." "With IVF?" Kate asked, surprised. She was ready for anything. "Not impossible," the doctor replied confidently. Her epic of going to doctors began. Tests, treatment, a lot of money was spent. Her husband regularly gave the right amount of money, kept quiet, but it was obvious that he was running out of patience. In the end, the doctors came to a verdict. "Yes, IVF is required. Have the husband come in. We have to get ready." "Kate, this is too much." Joseph burst out. "I've seen it done in the movies. You want to offer me magazines, test tubes? But what's the big deal?" Kate put her arm around her husband's shoulders. "It's not exactly a pleasant procedure for me either. But then we'll have a baby." "No, Kate, no," her husband replied emphatically. He twitched nervously, as if shaking his wife's hands off his shoulders. He got up abruptly from the dinner table and went into the room. There, he turned on the TV at full volume. It was another soccer broadcast, and so ended this story of trying to have baby. And then, at work, an elderly caregiver once gave Kate some sound advice. "You should take a child from an orphanage," suggested an older woman, aware of Kate's problem. "My niece, too, couldn't have a baby with her husband, and then they took a boy from an orphanage. Such a wonderful boy. They loved him like their own son. And then they were able to have a daughter themselves. And you should adopt. You should surround an abandoned child with warmth. God responds to such good deeds, and God willing, you will be able to give birth too." "I'd love to, but I'm afraid Joseph wouldn't like that idea," Kate sighed. "What kind of a man is that who doesn't like everything?" The older woman became angry, "And you try to convince him." But Joseph could not be persuaded. "Kate, you're already going to extremes. Why do we need someone else's baby?" Her husband was indignant after the woman shared with him about the conversation with a colleague. "Little kids, they're all pretty, just angels. And then what do they grow up to be? A drug addict or an alcoholic?" "Joseph, but it's how we raise it," Kate objected. "It's going to be our baby. It won't be ours. The blood is foreign. And there can be no normal children in the orphanage. They'll be as bad as their parents. Alcoholics and drug addicts." Husband stood his ground. "That's it, Kate. This conversation is over." Kate realized that it was useless. She could not change her husband's mind. She would have to forget about her dream and give all her unspent motherly love only to the kindergarten children. Yes, the children loved her, and she loved them too. But when in the evenings each of them ran to the locker room shouting, "Mommy's here," Kate's heart ached. Joseph was often away on business trips, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. for several days at a time. Kate felt especially lonely then. She loved her husband very much and always looked forward to his return. Joseph would arrive tired, a little nervous, but always so familiar. Kate understood that her husband had no time for children. Well, that was her fate. And it could have been different if she had not had that unfortunate abortion right after the 11th grade. Her mother had convinced her. And her first love, Scott, had just left for the army. She didn't tell him. So what to do? There's no telling how Scott would have felt about it. And was she ashamed of what people would say? What about people? They always just want to talk about somebody and gloat. So she did that reckless thing. Although on the other hand, then she would not have met Joseph, would not have received an education. Yes, we often do things that are wrong, but that doesn't mean that's where life stops. Joseph was due to arrive that day from another business trip. Kate, after work, cooked dinner in the kitchen. Apple pie, fried chicken. Joseph liked to eat good food. Then the doorbell rang. My sweetheart has come, Kate thought to herself, and she hurried to open the door. There was a large cardboard box on the mat by the door, and in the box, covered with newspaper, lay a baby. The baby, wrapped in a plaid blanket, was asleep. On top of the baby was a small piece of paper, and on it, in large letters, was written, "Giving." "My God, little one, how are you here?" said Kate in amazement, and she looked up the stairs, but there was no one there. The woman brought the box in. She put the baby down on the couch in the room. The baby was asleep. He was a few days old at most. "Baby, where's your feckless mother?" Could this be a chance? A chance to change everything? Kate's musings were interrupted by Joseph's loud voice and the abrupt slamming of the front door. "Wife, do you greet your husband with burnt food? Oh my God, the pie's on fire." Kate jumped up and ran out into the hallway. She kissed her husband on the spot and ran into the kitchen. "Well, what's in there?" asked Joseph. "Is there anything left for me?" "It's okay. The pie is almost intact," Kate replied with a smile as she pulled the pastry out of the mold. "Joseph, I have a surprise. You're going to go crazy." "Just like that?" The husband wondered. "Let's go to the room." The woman, finished with the pie, pulled him after her. The baby also continued to sleep peacefully, even smiling in his sleep. Joseph froze in the doorway. "Where did that come from?" he asked confusedly. "Joseph, it's a baby," Kate grinned, and told him the whole story. "Okay, we have to call the police." Joseph pulled out his cell phone. "Joseph, wait, let me at least look at him." Kate looked her husband pleadingly in the eyes. "You're being silly," my husband said sharply. "How about we take it for ourselves?" "There's a strange note in there," said the woman. "One fool got rid of her problems, and the other decided to take over those problems," replied Joseph sharply and dialed the police. And then the baby woke up and cried. Kate fussed over him. "Ah, he's wet." The woman brought a clean sheet and leaned over the baby. Joseph watched his wife's actions squeamishly. "It's a boy," Kate smiled. "He's cute." "Want to love affection," husband grumbled. The police arrived half an hour later. The medics arrived too. An elderly, tired policeman drew up a report. "Do you have any idea who might have planted the baby on you?" The policeman asked indifferently. "We're at a complete loss," Kate shrugged. "Also this note." "Yes, we'll put it on file." The policeman nodded. "Can the baby stay with us while the trial is going on?" asked Kate shyly, ignoring Joseph's angry look. "I can make sure he gets proper care." "I don't doubt it," the doctor, who arrived on the scene, replied with a sigh. "But we must get him to the hospital, examine him there, and then send him to the infant home. You are welcome to visit him if you wish. In principle, you can adopt him later if necessary," the policeman added. Joseph blushed at these words. And then the boy was taken away, and Kate felt very sad. The next day, before she started her shift at work, she was already at the hospital, asking about the boy's condition. All was well, but his mother had not yet been found. Kate was allowed to visit the child. He was just awake. lying in his crib, moving his arms and legs. A miracle! The girl marveled as she looked at the baby. The next day, Kate decided to go to the authorities. "I think you won't have any problems with the adoption. You just have to follow all the formalities." The woman in child welfare made a concession. "You and your husband gather the documents slowly." With husband? How can I convince him? The girl thought to herself. "Never you hear, never will I accept this foundling," cried Joseph in the evening when he learned of his wife's plans. Kate cried silently. "And anyway, I'm leaving tomorrow morning for another business trip. When I come back, get all these thoughts out of your head." In the morning, he left without even saying goodbye, and at lunchtime she received a call from the police. "Are you Joseph's wife?" A husky voice asked the receiver. "I'm a police officer. Your husband was in an accident on the way out of town. He died at the scene." "I'm sorry to hear that." Her eyes darkened at what she heard. Joseph, her Joseph, who for her was the most important man in the world, was dead. Sobs choked the woman. The events that followed passed like a fog. The identification, the funeral, the wake. Kate slowly began to come to her senses after a couple of weeks. The thought that there, in the hospital, a tiny boy might still be waiting for her brought her back to life. Having taken a leave of absence from work, Kate decided to take action. How lucky she was! The boy was still in the hospital. He was being prepared for transfer to an orphanage. Kate promptly gathered the paperwork, and 2 weeks later Kevin, as she called him, was at her home. "Sonny boy, little one, here we are home," she addressed the baby, holding him in her arms in her own apartment. Kate didn't even expect herself to be such a caring mommy. She left her job on maternity leave and gave all her tenderness and warmth to this little baby. Sometimes she wondered who the real mother of her son was and what that silly note meant. Sometimes she even felt guilty before her late husband. She'd done everything in spite of him. But then she brushed it off. It was all in the past. Now she and Kevin had a new life. 3 months later, Kevin went from a tiny baby to a pretty strong baby. "Mommy, you're feeding your son well," the nurse smiled. "I'm trying," Kate laughed back. So they lived, grew, developed. One day the phone rang. "Hello, sister," she heard a familiar voice. It was Victoria, Kate's own sister. "Hello," unexpectedly, Kate mused. "Our grandmother is sick here. She's not well at all. Come and say goodbye," Victoria said sadly and hung up. They hadn't spoken to her sister in years. It was since Kate left the village to study in the city. And the reason for that was the behavior of her younger sister. She was the one who told everyone in the village about the abortion. And when Kate rebuked her for it, she grinned angrily. You don't always have to be good and innocent. Ever since Victoria was a child, it seemed that everyone loved Kate more. And parents and teachers and boys invite her. And even later, at the funeral of her parents, who died in an accident, they never made up. And then Victoria left for another city. She lived there. She had little contact with her grandmother, unlike her older sister. The fact that it was she who called her with the news was very surprising to Kate. Kate caught grandmother still conscious. "Granddaughter, make up with your sister," the dying grandmother asked. "You are the closest thing to each other." And then there was the funeral, the wake, the second death of a loved one in recent memory. It was hard. And only Kevin distracted from my dark thoughts. Victoria had been there the whole time. Only the sisters hadn't grown closer, though they could see that Victoria had changed. She looked thoughtful, as if she wanted to say something. At the sight of Kevin, her face changed. One evening, Victoria walked into the room where Kate and the baby were temporarily staying and suddenly spoke up. "That's my son. Mine and your husband's." Kate froze at what she heard, and Victoria sobbed and began her story. Childish resentment did not let go. One day, she contacted Joseph on the internet, and they began communicating. Joseph knew that Victoria was Kate's sister, but it didn't bother him. Frequent business trips, there were none. He went to see Victoria in another city. And Victoria, at first she wanted to spite her sister, but she ended up falling in love. When she realized she was pregnant, she told Joseph. He sent her for an abortion. Victoria tricked him. When Joseph realized this, he got angry and left. She hid the pregnancy. She didn't register at the hospital. When Kevin was born at home, Victoria realized that she could not raise him by herself. Knowing her sister's problem, she decided to give the baby to her. Then she came to her senses. But it was too late. All this time she was secretly watching Kate and the baby walk in the park. "I'm begging you, give me my son," cried Victoria, making her confession. "It's my baby." Kate resented. "You've made your choice." In the morning, she and the baby left the village. Over the next few days, her indignation was endless. Give it away? No way. And then she suddenly remembered her childhood years, how they played sister. And then came these resentments. Victoria might have been right about something. And then the words of her dying grandmother came to mind. They're the closest thing to family. A week later, Kate arrived in the village. Victoria settled into her grandmother's house. When she saw her sister, she froze. "Victoria, my little sister," Kate began from the threshold, holding Kevin in her arms. "You and I really are the closest thing to family left on this earth. I can't raise a child in peace knowing that you are suffering. Sis, forgive me." "I'm so sorry to you," cried Victoria. "We're both to blame for everything. We'll make it up to you." The sisters approached each other. Kate handed the baby over. "What about you?" Victoria asked through her tears, cradling Kevin. "First of all, I'm going to help you regain your parental rights. And then time will tell," Kate replied. Time, it really put everything in its place. 1 month later, on her way back from Victoria with Kevin, she met Scott, her first love. His car broke down that day, and he had to take the train into town. They stared at each other in silence for a long time, and then got off the train in town, holding hands just as silently. It's been a year since they were together. Kate is little by little packing for the maternity hospital. Soon, very soon, their long-awaited miracle will appear. The doctors say it will be a girl.